Amen. Okay, so good morning. It's great to be with y'all today. And it is easy to feel a little intimidated speaking to a group of seminary professors and faculty and staff, but I really feel like you all are friends. So I am just trying and endeavoring to feel at home here. And I appreciate Dr. Blakemore giving me the opportunity to preach. So truly, I'm glad to be here doing this today. So when we moved from Tampa, Florida to Ridgeland, Mississippi 3.5 years ago, we had to buy a new washer and dryer. And we went to Facebook Marketplace to try to find a good, inexpensive set. And I didn't go pick it up, but from what Andy told me, when he went, it was one of these kind of questionable situations. The house looks a little sketchy, as we might say. And then there's about, 50 washers and dryers in the backyard that obviously have been collected to be refurbished. And so at that point, we thought, wow, these were so inexpensive. Are they going to work? For one thing, will they keep working? Well, by God's grace, our washer and dryer are still working to this day, which we're very grateful for. Well, last week, it was in the evening, close to bedtime. I was in our family room, kind of in earshot of the laundry room, and I heard the washer starting to make some noises. And maybe you've heard this kind of noise before. It's kind of a da-thump, da-thump, da-thump. And this is like a top-loading washing machine. Honestly, I've heard that noise before. I wasn't too alarmed. I didn't go and check on it. I just kind of left it thinking that it was somebody else's laundry load. The next morning, I went to put some laundry in, and I saw George's clothes. George is here with us today, our wonderful 13-year-old daughter. And of course, they do their own laundry, but I thought I'm just going to move this laundry over to the dryer for Georgia. When I got to the bottom, and I meant to bring these, but we were in a little bit of a rush to get out of the house. But when I got to the bottom of the washing machine, what did I find but two little pink weights? like conditioning weights, that you use when you do little workouts like Georgia does for her ballet exercises. Now, they're just 2 pounds each, but I've just never found weights in the washing machine before. And so I couldn't help but kind of like laugh out loud when I saw them. And when I asked Georgia, like, what do you know anything about these weights? And she had no idea. She had no knowledge of there being weights in the washing machine. But anyway, that experience, it made me think of life and how in life we can start to carry things and be weighed down by things like fears, responsibilities, even traumatic experiences we have. And we hardly realize it, but we get weighed down by things. And of course, we see in the news so much sadness and catastrophe. We feel badly turning our head away from it because we know so many people are suffering. It makes us sad. And currently, I'm sure many of us know people that are just addicted to news about the presidential race. It's like they're caught up in this mesmerizing digital spell that they can't break free from. John Eldredge says, while we have always had our individual struggles and heartbreaks to deal with, now we have the tragedies of the entire world delivered to us on our mobile devices. It really is kind of overwhelming. And so when I hear that, though, I tend to bristle a little bit because I think, but we're Christians. Aren't we supposed to have a heart for the whole world and to be able to, carry the heart of Jesus to the world? And I think the answer is yes. But the truth is, it can get to be a lot for our souls to all take in. And when we experience that weightiness, those burdens, does it affect us? Does it make us respond to people differently? Maybe are we less likely to stop and help a friend when they need help because we're too busy or worn out? Or are we more likely to be short with our children or our grandchildren? Or are we just unable to enjoy a moment of peace and even maybe boredom instead of instinctively reaching for our phone? Maybe we just have a tendency to feel restless and weary in our day-to-day tasks. Perhaps we just feel completely overwhelmed with all that we have to do. Or maybe we don't have enough to do of what we like to do. Maybe we have gotten behind on our seminary classwork. and we're seeing the end of the semester coming, and we're thinking, how on earth am I going to get this all accomplished by the end of the semester with the holidays coming and just all the extra busyness? We not only feel loaded down by the needs of the world, but we're also aware of our proclivity to deal with some of these burdens, maybe in not so healthy ways. And so, to use the language of this passage, we're aware we yoke ourselves to things. So, Jesus's day had its own challenges. Heavy demands placed on the Jewish people by religious leaders created this loop of striving and failing that just did not match up with the plan of a loving relationship that God had for his people. Rabbis used the term yoke to describe their way of interpreting the law. And in ancient Palestine, yokes would be used both domestically and, in agrarian ways. They'd come in different shapes and sizes, of course. But one way would be you might see someone carrying a yoke on their shoulders, if you can envision like a piece of wood across someone's shoulders with ropes hanging down to carry water. Well, the rabbis called their teachings a yoke because the scriptures were compared to living water. And so their work was to carry the living water, the Hebrew scriptures, and to teach it to others. But the problem was that their so-called water that they were bringing was heavy. It was weighted down with additional laws and expectations. And so Jesus seems to speak to this in Matthew 23, verse 4, when he says about the teachers of the law and the Pharisees. They tie up heavy, cumbersome loads and put them on other people's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to lift a finger to move them. Jesus knew of a weariness, of a restlessness, the tendency of humans to be yoked to something. And whatever it is, it's going to affect us. Likely, either we will control it or it will control us. In Matthew chapter 11, verse 27, Jesus explains he has come to reveal the Father and to address the restlessness and the questions and the weariness that we all have. And how does he reveal our Father God? By explaining that all can come to him and experience true rest. He says, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." And maybe his audience would have heard some familiar words, maybe a quote from Jeremiah 6:16 that says, "Stand at the crossroads and look. Ask for the ancient paths. Ask where the good way is and walk in it, and you will find rest for your souls." Words from the Lord to call out the people of Jerusalem that refused to find their rest in God. And Jesus spoke to the same issue when he says, "Take my yoke upon you." So I mentioned the kind of yoke that somebody could wear to transport water, but probably the more familiar yoke is the yoke that would be used to put two farm animals together. I've never seen one of these working in real life, but I've seen them on the wall of Cracker Barrel before. So that's generally where we see a yoke, right? As used as like a decoration of some kind. But anyway, so we at least maybe we've seen one before, but we can imagine that the yoke was used for farm animals to connect two animals together so they could work together. They could accomplish more work if they were yoked together. And in Jesus's day, oxen yokes were made of wood. And supposedly that when the oxen was purchased or the ox was bought, then the animal would be, measured in some way. And then the yoke would be roughed out or carved out of the wood. And the ox was brought back to have the yoke tried on. So the idea was that the yoke, to some degree, needed to fit the animal. And it wasn't meant to hurt the animal. It wasn't meant to be a burden, but it was meant to join these two creatures together. And of course, the beauty of it was that there would often be a stronger animal joined to a weaker animal. And so the stronger one would help teach the weaker one how to do the work and how to carry the load. And so we see how Jesus tells us even to get in the yoke with him. And I think he has a yoke for each of us. He has a plan for each of us. It's interesting that that word easy in Greek, I'm not a Greek student, but it could mean like easy to wear. And you think, well, if something is easy to wear, it probably fits well. And so maybe there is a connection between this easy yoke and a well fitted yoke, that the yoke Jesus has for us may not always be easy in the way we think of easy, but at least it fits us and fits the purpose he has for us. And so Jesus wants us to get in the yoke with him. But my big question is how? How do we get in the yoke with him? I want to be in the yoke with him. Well, it seems like we do need to take time every day to make this happen, to present ourselves to Jesus and to yield to him and make sure he knows we want more of him in our lives. Now, practically speaking, I think there are ways we can get in the yoke with him. And if we went around the room, I bet each of you would say, there's something I do every day that helps me kind of get in the yoke with Jesus. But I just want to share a few practical things to think about. And again, I probably could learn some ways from you all, but I think we can start off every morning by telling Jesus that we love him and that we want to be united with him, that we want our relationship with him, our union with him to be right and good and holy. And of course, we can confess our sin to him at that point. And we can let go of those burdens, the worldly burdens that we carry, the news, the sadness that we see. We can release that. We can detach ourselves from it because we know he's able to carry it, even when we cannot carry it all. St. Augustine said in his commentary on the Psalms, we must empty ourselves of all that fills us so that we may be filled with what we are empty of. And so we can do that every day as we seek to be unified with Jesus. Another thing to do that I've enjoyed that kind of speaks to me and feeds my soul is just being aware of beauty around us, that we know God made beautiful things to encourage us, to enrich our soul, to speak to us. And so are we taking in beauty as much as we can? And you maybe have heard Andy mention the gracious ritual we feel like the Lord has given us for this season to go out first thing in the morning. Right now, it's still dark. We're looking forward to the time change. But go out, put our bare feet in the grass and in the dirt, and we touch a tree. And it's beautiful now. We look up, it's often, we haven't had rain and clouds lately. So we see the stars and we think, wow, what is mankind that you are mindful of him, Lord? And we start off the day with that sense of drinking in God's creation and beauty. It's just one way to get in the yoke with Jesus. Another way is simple unplugging. We know our attention is constantly being taken hostage, and we can't give God our attention when our attention is always being targeted and taken captive. And often we are cooperating. We're just kind of giving in to it. And so, if we're honest, we might realize we kind of prefer distraction sometimes because it keeps us from dealing with our soul and our hurts or just deeper needs that we have. Maybe we don't even want to have to be bored. So anyway, obviously, I know you guys know about that it's just good to get away from our phones and screens and media, whatever maybe is just, clouding our minds and our hearts and souls. That's another way that helps me to get in the yoke. So maybe you're hearing these things. I know there's many other ways, serving and using our gifts and all of that. But you might hear this and you just are frustrated because you think, I don't want to hear more ideas, Abby. Don't tell me one more thing to do. I have too much on my plate. I'm overwhelmed. And if you're like me, I've heard, there's been certain points in my life when I've heard a sermon on Mary and Martha, and I'm like, don't tell me to be Mary. I'm trying. I'm trying to hold it together here, So anyway, I know it can be frustrating sometimes, but to hear those kinds of messages. Anyway, but at the heart of it is, I think this scripture is a call to stop our striving, to get in the yoke, to enjoy the rest that Jesus wants us to have as we submit to his plan, as we yield to his grace in our lives. Recently, Andy and I were asked to share a testimony, a joint testimony at our church. We were having kind of a less formal service at our church on Sunday night, a little unusual for our church. We were like, yay, as much as we enjoy our traditional service. And we managed to not go to divorce court as a result of preparing. Sometimes it can be a little, I think we're getting a little better at it, thankfully. But anyway, we prepared this testimony. And anyway, this is very brief. I'm going to try to make it brief, but just wanted to share that with you as a testimony of seeing how God has moved us from one place to another, and how he has obviously had a plan for us all along. Anyway, many of you know that Andy and I were Salvation Army officers for 15 years. And so that means we were pastors, administrators in the Salvation Army. I think one of the strengths of the Army is that husband and wife serve together. You have to both be called. You're both ordained. Generally, you're both given the same appointment. And there's a lot of strength with that, as you can imagine. But about 4 years into our experience, and I haven't really shared this, so here we go. But about 4 years in, I started feeling, wondering. I'm a wanderer discerner. And so I started wondering, Jesus, is this what you have for us for our whole adult career? Because that's really what you sign up for with the Army. Is it's like you sign that officer's covenant and you're in. It's a big commitment. It's a very small, tight subculture. Anyway, I spoke with Andy about this, and he didn't see it the same way, And I understand why, because we were so dependent on the Army for our livelihood. We were seeing fruit within, what we were doing. There were good things happening. It seemed like it was a great way for God to use our gifts in the kingdom. And Andy came from a big Salvation Army family. He was a 6th-generation Salvation Army officer. So that goes back all the way pretty much to the beginning of the Salvation Army in 19th century in England. So, I was aware of that when we got married. I knew the Salvation Army was going to be a part of our lives. So anyway, he didn't see it the same way. We had conversations about this from time to time. And of course, the last thing either of us wanted to do was to rebel against God's way for our lives. We wanted to do what God wanted us to do. And so I just got to a point where I thought, okay, Lord, this Army doesn't always feel like the right fit. The system of the Army, et cetera. I really want to be obedient to you. And I obviously couldn't be the Holy Spirit for my husband. I knew it had to be God working in Andy's heart and mind. It had to be God's timing. So I just continued to put this before the Lord. One day I was praying, I would say probably crying out to the Lord. And I felt like he said something to me, which is, I don't have that experience frequently. But I felt like he asked me, Abby, do you trust me? And I thought, oh, of course, yes, I do trust you, God. And so that was a turning point that would come back to me, as I would bring it before the Lord. I would sense him saying again, Abby, do you trust me? And of course, I knew that needed to be the case. So over the course of about a decade, we just kept following God's lead, and certain things would happen. I know y'all have had this experience. You'd have a conversation with someone and they'd offer a word of encouragement, or, something would kind of be crystallized, and you would think, I think that was kind of a big deal. And then later you realize, yeah, that was really significant, that I had that meeting with that person. Or maybe, we had a moment of prayer at the altar where we felt, that it was another, just moments like that where we felt like God was moving and shifting, and especially in Andy's life. So we got to the point finally where there was a job opportunity and it seemed perfect. We just thought, wow, God has done a miracle, because again, such a big deal for us to consider leaving. Well, again, I won't go into the details, but it didn't work out. And it was difficult. It was during the COVID lockdown time in spring of 2020. And we just, Lord, what are you doing? We thought this was it. Well, it was about 7 months later that Andy was contacted and found out about the dean's position at Wesley Biblical Seminary. And initially we thought, well, we weren't planning on moving to Mississippi. It's not close to our parents. We had heard WBS had had some really significant financial challenges like several years prior. And we thought, is this a good fit for Andy? Is this the right fit for the seminary? Is this what the seminary needs? Is this what, anyway. So initially we thought this probably isn't it. And we said, basically together, or Andy turned it down, even though, he was approached, he hadn't sought it out. Well, we felt convicted to go back and pray about it. I mean, we knew it was an amazing opportunity. And eventually, again, I know I'm having to kind of go through this all quickly, but God sent signs and sent things to point us toward WBS, that we just felt like this, in fact, is exactly where we need to be. Still some questions and wondering, but it just was pretty clear. Like this was where God was, after all these years, after, over a decade of wondering and waiting on the Lord, that this was where he wanted us to go. And I share that testimony, and thank you, for your testimony, your patience, because I know that's kind of a big, broad sweep of our life. But I share it to say that when I sensed the Lord asking me about 13 years ago now, do you trust me? I really see that it was him asking me to get in the yoke with him. And, getting in the yoke with Jesus, it really is remarkable. We learn so much. We learn about ourselves, ways that we need to change, ways we need to grow, how we need to be more like Jesus. We see the power of his grace to help us, to use us, to walk us through difficult circumstances. Again, I wouldn't exactly say it's been easy. Jesus says, my yoke is easy, but I think it has been well-fitting. I think it has been what he has wanted for us. And so just in closing, I want to say his yoke is the best place to be. Thank you.